The heat in Lagos was suffocating, but Amara Okafor was used to discomfort. Her slippers had broken on the bus ride, and now she walked barefoot down Victoria Island's polished streets, the sun scorching her feet like punishment for daring to dream. Her CV, slightly damp from sweat, was tucked carefully under her arm. The other applicants at Okechukwu Global Holdings looked sleek and confident, stepping out of air-conditioned cars in Italian suits. Amara, on the other hand, wore a faded blouse and skirt stitched together by her neighbor, and carried nothing but her courage and desperation. Inside the penthouse office of the glass tower, Damian Okechukwu leaned against his desk, unimpressed as his HR manager rattled off names of recommended assistants. "They're all the same," he muttered. "Rich kids with soft hands and Instagram egos." Damian, the enigmatic billionaire behind Nigeria's top investment firm, was known for firing more assistants than he hired. He didn't trust easily. Raised by a father who believed emotions were weaknesses, Damian had built an empire by being cold, calculated, and utterly alone. What he needed wasn't another paper-perfect resume. He needed someone who understood what it meant to fight. Amara didn't have an appointment. She barely had shoes, but when she stepped into the marble lobby and asked for a job, the receptionist laughed. "This is OGH, not a church charity drive," she sneered, but Amara's voice didn't waver. "I have a degree, I have brains, and I can work harder than anyone else in this building. That's worth more than a designer bag." The head of HR happened to overhear her and, intrigued by her boldness, decided to take her up to Damian. "You're either very brave," he said, "or very foolish." Damian's eyes narrowed as the girl walked into his office barefoot, shoulders square, chin lifted. "What's your name?" he asked, amused. "Amara," she replied. "I'm not here for pity. I'm here to prove myself." He studied her, the fire in her eyes, oddly familiar. Then, without warning, he tossed her a pen. "Come back tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp." She caught the pen mid-air without flinching. As she walked out of the room, Damian smirked. This wasn't charity. This was curiosity. Amara arrived at exactly 7:59 a.m., dressed in a crisp white shirt and black trousers borrowed from her cousin. Her hair was neatly packed, and her expression was composed but alert. The office was quiet, its floors echoing under her cheap shoes as she walked past glass walls filled with power suits and skeptical stares. Damian's executive assistant, well, former assistant, had quit the night before, leaving a desk full of chaos. Damian didn't even look up when Amara entered. "You're early," he said. "That's rare. Sit. You have 100 emails to respond to." By noon, Amara had already memorized the internal structure of the company, responded to priority emails, and scheduled Damian's meetings more efficiently than anyone had in weeks. Damian was impressed but didn't say so. He merely tossed her a key to a drawer and said, "Keep this locked. Inside is my limited edition tourbillon watch, worth more than your apartment. Don't touch it." Amara gave him a sharp glance but nodded. She had no intention of touching anything that didn't belong to her. Respect was not just a rule to her, it was a lifestyle she had learned from her mother. But the next morning, the drawer was open and the watch was gone. Damian stormed into the office like a thundercloud. "Where is it?" he growled, slamming a file down. Amara was stunned. "I didn't touch it," she said, her voice cracking with fear and offense. The HR manager and a security guard stood beside him. The shame that washed over her was unbearable, being accused of stealing when her entire life had been a battle against such stereotypes. "You think because I'm poor, I'm a thief?" she said, tears welling up in her eyes but refusing to fall. Just as she was about to be escorted out, Damian's phone buzzed. CCTV footage revealed the true culprit, his ex-girlfriend Bianca, who had stormed in the night before, using her still-active keycard to grab the watch in a jealous rage. Damian turned pale, then dismissed the guards with a wave. "You're reinstated," he said curtly. Amara didn't say a word. She walked back to her desk, sat down, and resumed typing. But inside, something had shifted. The job wasn't just about survival anymore. Now, it was personal. Damian watched Amara through the glass wall of his office. There was something unsettling about her, how she moved with quiet confidence, how she never tried to impress him, and how her presence lingered in the air long after she left a room. After the incident with the missing watch, she returned to work without complaint, refusing his awkward attempts at apology. That bothered him. Most people either feared him or worshipped him. But Amara treated him like just another flawed man, and for reasons he couldn't explain, that unnerved him more than he liked. Later that day, he summoned her to his office. "You're staying too far from the office. I had my driver follow you home," he said bluntly. Amara's eyes narrowed. "You had me followed?" He didn't flinch. "You're working long hours, and I need you alert. I've arranged a serviced apartment in Ikoyi. It's close, secure, and covered under your employment package." Amara's pride kicked in immediately. "I didn't ask for handouts." Damian met her gaze evenly. "It's not charity, it's logistics." She hated how he always made things sound so practical, even when they weren't. When she moved into the apartment that weekend, her jaw dropped. It was massive, sunlit, and tastefully furnished with luxury pieces she didn't know the names of. But the biggest surprise came when she stepped onto the balcony and looked across the courtyard. There, not 50 feet away, was Damian's penthouse terrace, his figure casually sipping whiskey, shirt unbuttoned, watching the skyline. Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. A strange silence passed between them. Not awkward, but charged. He raised his glass to her. She closed the curtains. The next day at work, neither of them mentioned the apartment, the balcony, or the lingering stare. But something had changed. Amara started noticing how Damian spoke a little softer when he addressed her, how he didn't yell when she challenged his ideas. And Damian, in turn, noticed how her laugh sounded like wind chimes, rare but unforgettable. Still, nothing was said. They were playing a silent game of boundaries, of pride, of tension that grew with each passing moment. A game that neither of them knew how to win, or if they even wanted to. Amara arrived early as usual, balancing 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for Damian, just the way he liked it. She didn't do it out of obligation. It had become an unspoken ritual, their version of truce in a work relationship full of unspoken tension. But something felt off that morning. Damian was colder than usual, his jaw clenched as he reviewed financial reports. When she asked if something was wrong, he only replied, "The board's moving behind my back." She didn't press until she accidentally overheard a conversation that changed everything. In the hallway outside the executive lounge, Amara paused when she heard Damian's COO, Mr. Kaladi, speaking in hushed tones with a competitor on the phone. "The files will be on your desk tomorrow. We leak it, and Okechukwu Global collapses. He won't see it coming." Her heart raced. She didn't understand all the technical jargon, but she understood betrayal. And for reasons she couldn't explain, the thought of Damian being blindsided of him, losing everything, filled her with dread. She rushed back to her desk, replaying the words in her head, unsure if she should get involved. That evening, when Damian was alone in his office, Amara knocked once and stepped in. "I need to tell you something. Your COO is planning to sell confidential files to your rival." He stared at her like she had grown a second head. "You overheard what?" She explained everything. His expression hardened. "Do you have proof?" She hesitated. "No, but I wouldn't lie." His silence was deafening. After a moment, he stood and said coldly, "Thank you for your concern, but I don't pay you to eavesdrop." The next morning, Amara found a formal letter on her desk. She had been dismissed for breach of conduct. She packed her things in silence, her chest burning with humiliation. She hadn't cried when she was accused of theft. She hadn't cried when she was watched like a security threat. But this? This betrayal stung. She had risked everything to protect him, and now she was being discarded like trash. But just as she reached the elevator, 2 security guards rushed past her toward the boardroom. Minutes later, she heard shouting, glass breaking, and Damian's furious voice echoing down the hall. "You sold me out, Claude." She didn't smile, but as she walked out the front doors, she knew one thing: she had been right. And maybe, just maybe, Damian would remember that. 3 days passed, no calls, no messages. Amara tried to distract herself by helping her neighbor run a small food kiosk near the park, but her mind kept drifting back to Damian's face. Stoic, unreadable, yet clearly shaken when Khaled was exposed. That night, unable to sleep, she logged onto her favorite anonymous chat platform, one she had used for months. It was a place where she could vent, share her fears, and talk freely without judgment. There was one particular user, Nightwalker, who had been a source of comfort through her job struggles. He always seemed to understand her pain in ways no one else could. Curious and desperate for some human connection, she typed, "Lost my job, again, tried to do the right thing, got burned for it." A reply came almost instantly. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything first. But the right people always see the truth eventually. It felt personal, too personal. The next message chilled her. "You trusted someone who doesn't know how to be trusted. I hope he realizes it before it's too late." Amara blinked. She had never mentioned Damian in specifics. She stared at the username, a strange feeling curling in her stomach. Nightwalker wasn't just a stranger. He knew too much. Unable to let it go, she searched the IP trail through a friend who worked in IT support. What she found made her drop her phone. The messages were traced back to an internal server within Okechukwu Global Holdings, Damian's personal network. She gasped. Nightwalker. Was Damian? The man who had comforted her in the darkest hours was the same man who had fired her? Who watched her every move with cold precision by day, but shared his soul with her at night under a fake identity? It wasn't just betrayal, it was intimacy under false pretenses. Furious and confused, Amara marched into the office building the next morning. Security was shocked to see her, but before they could stop her, Damian stepped into the lobby, looking stunned. "You were Nightwalker," she said, voice trembling. He didn't deny it. "You seemed freer online. I could speak to you without the wall between us." Amara shook her head. "You hid behind a screen while treating me like dirt in person. That's not honesty. That's cowardice." She walked away again, this time with her head high. And for the first time, Damian looked like a man who had everything, yet nothing at all. Amara hadn't spoken to Damian since the confrontation. She returned to her simple life, teaching neighborhood kids, helping her mother at the Accra stall, and trying to scrub him from her memory. But Lagos had a cruel sense of humor. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up in front of her mother's kiosk. A driver stepped out and handed Amara a sealed invitation. "You are cordially invited to the Okechukwu Foundation Gala." At first, she laughed. "He must be joking," she muttered. But at night, curiosity crept in. Why would he invite her to a high society event after all they'd been through? After 2 days of debating, Amara said yes, partly out of pride, partly to show him she wasn't the broken girl he thought he'd dismissed. She borrowed a sequined gown from her friend Ada and styled her natural hair into a regal updo. When she walked into the ballroom, heads turned. Rich women whispered behind champagne glasses, wondering who she was. "His assistant-turned-pet project?" one sneered. Amara kept her chin high. Damian saw her from across the room and froze mid-conversation. She wasn't just beautiful, she looked like she belonged, and yet the tension in her eyes warned him she was not here for show. An overzealous board member cornered her near the buffet. "You're quite the topic of discussion, Miss Assistant. I heard you used to walk barefoot?" The table laughed. Amara flushed but stayed composed. "Yes," she said, "and yet here I am. Must be doing something right." Just then, Damian appeared. "You are," he said loudly, placing a protective hand on her back. "In fact, she's the most competent, fearless woman in this room, and without her, this company would have fallen to pieces." The laughter died. The board fell silent, and Amara for the first time saw something genuine in his eyes. That night after the gala, Damian walked her to the waiting car. "I meant what I said," he told her, "not because I felt sorry for you, but because I respect you." Amara studied his face, unsure what to believe. "Respect looks different in private and public, Damian," she replied. "Don't confuse a speech for sincerity." He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. She got into the car without another word. As it pulled away, he remained standing there alone on the red carpet, no longer the man in control. Amara was just beginning to feel stable again when trouble arrived in 6-inch heels and a designer dress. Bianca, Oalabi's socialite, media darling, and Damian's ex-fiancé strode into the office unannounced. She had the kind of beauty that silenced rooms, and she knew it. "Darling," she said to Damian with a sultry smirk, "Lagos is boring without you." Damian stiffened behind his desk. Amara watched from her corner, trying not to react. Bianca turned her eyes to her and smiled. "And you must be the new pet project." Her voice was sweet poison. Amara said nothing, but her blood boiled. After their awkward encounter, Bianca caught Amara in the elevator. "Word of advice? Don't get comfortable. Damian goes through assistance like I go through handbags." Amara replied coolly, "I'm not his anything, and if you think I'm scared of you, you're underestimating me." Bianca stepped closer, her perfume cloying. "Then you should know something. He didn't just stop the engagement because we fell out of love. He stopped it because I discovered the truth." Amara's heart thudded. "What truth?" Bianca smiled. "Ask him why he doesn't trust love or people. Ask him what happened in Paris 3 years ago." And that night, Amara lay in bed unable to sleep. Her mind played Bianca's words on repeat. Was there a part of Damian she didn't know? Something dark enough to end a marriage and turn a man into a fortress of emotional ice? Her fingers hovered over her phone, wanting to message him, but she stopped. She didn't want the version of Damian behind the screen. She wanted the man himself to be honest with her, face to face. And if he couldn't do that, then maybe she'd been fooling herself all along. The next morning, Damian showed up at her apartment unannounced. No driver, no security. Just him in a silence that screamed regret. "What did Bianca tell you?" he asked, his voice low. Amara didn't blink. "Enough to wonder if I should still trust you." He looked exhausted, as though carrying a weight he'd never let go. "I've made mistakes, big ones. But if I tell you, you'll see me differently." She crossed her arms. "Maybe I need to. I'm tired of guessing who I'm dealing with." He looked down, hesitated, and then whispered, "Paris wasn't just a failed proposal. It was a tragedy I never recovered from." But he didn't say what it was. Not yet. It was supposed to be a normal day at the office. Amara was updating Damian's calendar when she heard a loud thud from behind his door. Her heart stopped. She rushed in and found him collapsed on the floor, his face pale, body trembling. "Damian!" she screamed. Within minutes, security and paramedics swarmed the office, and he was rushed to the hospital. The image of him, so powerful, so untouchable, suddenly weak and vulnerable, shook her. Sitting in the waiting room, hands trembling, she prayed like she hadn't in years. Not for her job, not for herself, for him. When the doctor emerged, his expression was grave. "He's stable now," he said, "but we needed a specific blood type urgently. AB negative. Very rare." Amara blinked. "I'm AB negative," she murmured. Without hesitation, she signed the consent form and donated. As her blood drained into the sterile bag, she stared at the ceiling, numb and confused. How had she come to care this much about a man who barely let anyone close? And why did it feel like she was bleeding out more than just blood, like pieces of her heart were going with it? While recovering, a nurse accidentally left Damian's chart open beside her. Amara tried not to look, but curiosity got the better of her. What she saw made her breath catch. Damian had been diagnosed with a rare, potentially fatal heart condition 3 years ago, right around the time of Paris. There were surgical notes, therapy suggestions, and refusals. He had refused treatment multiple times. Why? Why keep it secret? Why live like time didn't matter? She stared at his name on the chart, her own blood now running through his veins, and felt a complicated rage blooming inside her. When he woke up, she was at his bedside. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she whispered. His voice was hoarse. "I didn't want pity or weakness." Her eyes burned. "You'd rather die alone than admit you need help." He looked away. "I already lost someone in Paris because of this. I didn't want it to happen again." Amara leaned in, her voice sharp. "Then stop pushing people away like you're a ghost. You're alive, Damian, but if you keep pretending you're not, One day you really won't be, and no one will be there to save you. He didn't respond, but his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before. Fear, and maybe the start of change. Damian returned to work after 2 weeks of forced rest, but nothing about him felt the same. His suit still fit perfectly, his presence still turned heads, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed. Amara noticed the change instantly. He was quieter, less sharp, as if he had been forced to see his mortality and couldn't unsee it. But what shocked her even more was what she found on his desk one evening while organizing files. A legal document marked Inheritance Clause Urgent. Curiosity prickled. Her breath hitched as she read the words aloud. Mr. Damian Okechukwu must be legally married before his 36th birthday in order to retain controlling shares of Okechukwu Global Holdings. 36, in less than 4 months. Her mind raced. Was this why he had reached out to Bianca? Why the gala invite? Why the sudden shift in tone? That night she confronted him. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. He was sitting alone in his office, nursing a glass of scotch. "Because it's none of your business," he said, but his voice lacked venom. "Really?" Amara shot back. "You made me your assistant. You made me your nurse, your confidant. But when it's time to tell the truth, I'm just the help?" Damian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want me to say, Amara? That I'm terrified of marrying someone for money again?" Then out of nowhere, he said it. "We could get married." The room went silent. Amara's heart slammed against her chest. "Excuse me?" He stood slowly, walking toward her. "You're the only person I trust, and it doesn't have to be real, just legal. A contract, 3 months. I keep the company. You get anything you want." Amara stared at him in disbelief. "Anything I want?" she echoed. He nodded. "Freedom, power, a future. You name it." It was the coldest proposal imaginable, and yet something in his voice, uncertain, almost pleading, made it anything but. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at him with a strange mix of anger, amusement, and awe. "You think I'm the kind of girl who dreams of being a billionaire's backup plan?" she asked softly. "If I say yes, it won't be because I want your world, Damian. It'll be because I want to change it." He met her gaze, stunned by her strength. For once, she wasn't the one proving herself to him. He was the one hoping she'd stay. And that terrified him more than losing his company ever could. The next morning, Amara walked into the office earlier than usual, not to resume work, but to end it. She was done playing Damian's emotional crutch, medical emergency contact, and now marital backup plan. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there, not as a man in love, but as a CEO trying to close a personal business deal with her heart. When she reached his office, he was already there, looking like he hadn't slept either. "Amara," he said cautiously. She handed him an envelope. "That's my resignation." Damian's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." She laughed, bitter and tired. "The only mistake I made was believing you saw me as more than a convenient solution." She took a breath. "I've carried your secrets, shielded you from sabotage, and gave you my blood, literally. And in return, you offered me a contract. Not love, not respect, just another job." His face was unreadable. "This isn't about disrespect." She cut him off. "It is, because you think your money makes everything negotiable, including me." For once, he had no comeback. She walked out without another word, her heels echoing down the marble hallway like gunshots. The staff stared, stunned. No one ever walked away from Damian Okechukwu, not without consequences. But Amara didn't look back. That afternoon, she filed paperwork to register her own business. The Rising Room, a mentorship program for girls from low-income backgrounds with big dreams. Within 48 hours, her story started trending on social media. "Poor girl turns down billionaire's proposal to start empowerment center" went viral. She didn't care about the fame. She cared that she finally chose herself. Damian watched the video of her ribbon-cutting ceremony from his office. Silent. She stood in front of a crowd of girls, telling them they were powerful, capable, unstoppable. And in that moment, she wasn't his assistant. She wasn't his project. She was Amara, and she had become everything he admired, feared, and maybe loved. But he had pushed her too far. And now, for the first time in his life, Damian Okechukwu realized he might have finally lost something he couldn't replace. In just 3 weeks, the rising room exploded. Amara's story touched a nerve. Donations poured in, media outlets lined up for interviews, and young girls from slums and suburbs alike stood in long lines just to hear her speak. She wasn't just a symbol, she was a movement. Her name trended alongside hashtags like #boss from the bottom and #AmaraEffect. But Amara didn't care about the spotlight. She was focused on building something that would outlast her. Something Damian, for all his billions, had never understood. Legacy that wasn't tied to wealth, but to impact. Meanwhile, Damian sat alone in his penthouse, drinking too much and sleeping too little. Meetings blurred together, and his board grew restless. He wasn't the sharp, feared leader they were used to. Bianca tried to re-enter his life, whispering sweet nothings about reconciliation. But he barely looked at her. His thoughts were consumed by Amara. He'd underestimated her, thought she'd fall in line, be grateful. Instead, she walked away and thrived without him. That haunted him. He had everything, and yet he had never felt emptier. One rainy afternoon, while delivering a motivational talk at a women's conference, Amara received a mysterious note passed backstage. It read, "Meet me at the National Archives. There's something you need to see. It's about your father." Confused and slightly skeptical, she went. Inside the dusty building, a retired clerk showed her an adoption file, one sealed and marked confidential. The name on the file sent shivers through her. Chief Edward Ikenna Owolabi, billionaire oil magnate. Her biological father, a man she never knew. A man who died 2 years ago and had left behind an unclaimed fortune in her name. Amara staggered out of the building, her mind reeling. The world tilted. For years she had fought to be seen, to be heard, to matter, and now she discovered she was born an heiress. An empire she never asked for had been sitting in her bloodline. But it wasn't the wealth that shook her most. It was the realization that she was no longer the poor girl with borrowed shoes. She was now richer than Damian Okechukwu himself, and as the storm raged around her, she smiled not out of vengeance, but out of irony. Oh, how the tables had turned. The news hit the Lagos business world like a thunderclap. Amara Ikenna Owolabi, long-lost daughter of billionaire oil tycoon, steps forward to claim inheritance. Headlines rolled in nonstop. Photos of Amara at the orphanage, her childhood in Mushin, and her quiet struggle went viral again, but this time with a twist. She wasn't just a success story. She was legacy. The board of Owolabi Oil summoned her for a private meeting. She expected resistance, but the elders welcomed her. "You are your father's daughter. He always regretted losing you," one of them said. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, her soul still catching up to her bloodline. Damian watched the press conference from his office, fists clenched. Amara stood in a navy blue power suit, elegant and composed, announcing her intention to honor her father's legacy through sustainable energy investments. Investors cheered, markets shifted, and for the first time in his life, Damian Okechukwu knew what it meant to feel small. The same people who used to suck up to him now whispered about her. "Maybe you should marry her now," one board member joked behind his back. Damian didn't smile. He wasn't losing her to status, he was losing her to destiny. That evening, he showed up at her new office without an appointment. It was sleek, modern, minimalist, and guarded. Amara saw him on the security feed and debated not letting him in. But curiosity won. He entered looking slightly less perfect, his tie loosened, his eyes softer. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You earned it." She raised an eyebrow. "Did I? Or was it always mine and the world just couldn't see it until now?" He swallowed. "I saw it. Too late maybe, but I did." There was a beat of silence before she asked, "And now that I'm wealthier than you, do you still want to marry me?" He blinked, stunned. Her voice wasn't mocking. It was matter of fact. She leaned forward. Because I need to know if it was ever about love, or if I just fit the plan. Damian stepped closer, his voice shaking for the first time. It was never the plan. You were the disruption, the chaos, the truth. And now, the only thing I want. Amara tilted her head, considering. Then prove it. Not with money, not with a ring, but with something real. Because from now on, Damian, I'm the one with options. And for once he nodded because he understood she wasn't asking for power. She already had it. Damian tried. For the first time in his life, he truly tried. No grand gestures, no manipulation, just presence. He showed up at Amara's events, listened more than he spoke, and began to break down the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. And Amara, guarded though she remained, began to soften. She saw his effort, his restraint, the way he'd let go of needing to win. They started meeting for coffee, not contracts. Talking for hours, not negotiating. It felt like a beginning, something fragile but real. She didn't say she loved him. He didn't say it either. But it was there, unspoken, brewing. But just when the air between them was finally warm again, the storm returned. Amara received an urgent call from her lawyer. A shadow investor had made a quiet move to buy out the Rising Room. Not just invest, buy it entirely. When she asked who was behind the acquisition attempt, the name hit her like a slap. Dew Holdings, Damian. Her world stopped spinning. The Rising Room wasn't just a business. It was her purpose, her power, her proof. And the one man she'd started to trust again had tried to take it away. She didn't call him. She didn't text. She went straight to his office, storming through his staff like a hurricane in heels. Why? She demanded. Why would you try to buy my heart out from under me? Damian, visibly shaken, stood. It wasn't what it looked like. You were trying to control me, she snapped. Again, you said you wanted something real, but you're still playing God, he tried to explain. I didn't want to own it. I wanted to protect it. You're becoming powerful, Amara. That comes with enemies. I thought if I owned a majority share, I could keep you safe. She laughed bitterly. Then you never really understood me at all. She walked out without letting him finish. That night, she sent back the apartment keys, the pendant he gave her, and the final coffee cup he left on her desk with a note. I'd rather fail on my own than succeed under your thumb. Damian didn't chase her this time. He just stood there shattered. Because now it wasn't about losing her love. It was about the gut-wrenching realization that he never truly knew how to give it in the first place. The scandal broke at dawn. News spread like wildfire across Lagos and global financial markets. Okechukwu Global under investigation for insider trading. Damian's name was dragged across every screen, every blog, every gossip thread. The board turned their backs instantly. Stocks plummeted. Bank accounts were frozen. He was summoned for questioning by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Cameras swarmed his gate. Former allies now claimed he had always been too aggressive. The man once known for being untouchable was now public enemy number one. And the worst part? Damian had no idea who betrayed him from within. Amara watched the press conference from her office, emotionless. She didn't text. She didn't call. Not yet. Part of her wanted to believe this was karma, but another part, the part that still dreamed of who he could have been, felt something deeper. Doubt. She reviewed the allegations. Something didn't add up. Damian was many things: controlling, cold, complicated, but careless with money? Never. So she started digging. Quietly. She called in a favor from a journalist she once mentored. Within 48 hours, the truth emerged. Damian had been framed by the same board member who once laughed about marrying her for power. The evidence was damning. Forged documents, manipulated email chains, anonymous tip-offs timed perfectly to remove him from power. It was a full-blown takedown. Amara stood in her office holding the folder that could save the man who tried to control her, who also, despite it all, had loved her in his broken way. Everyone around her advised against it. Let him fall. He deserves it. But Amara didn't believe in revenge. She believed in redemption. She remembered the man who bled out on his office floor, and the one who whispered truths behind a username. So she made a decision. At Damian's trial hearing, silence fell as Amara entered the courtroom. All eyes turned. She walked straight to the front, handed the judge the documents, and said, "He didn't do this, but I know who did." Gasps followed. Damian turned slowly, stunned. Their eyes met. No smiles, no tears, just something deeper. Understanding. Amara didn't speak to him afterward. She simply left, her heels echoing on the marble-like closure. Because this wasn't about saving a man, it was about saving a part of herself that still believed people could change if someone believed in them long enough. Weeks passed. Damian was cleared of all charges. The traitorous board member was arrested, and public sympathy turned in his favor again. But Damian wasn't celebrating. He stayed out of the spotlight, away from cameras, and most of all, away from Amara. He didn't reach out, not because he didn't want to, but because for the first time in his life, he understood that earning someone back meant giving them space to choose you again. And maybe she never would. The silence was his punishment, and perhaps his healing. Amara, on the other hand, was more visible than ever. She gave speeches, launched new chapters of the Rising Room across Nigeria, and turned down multiple billionaire partnership offers. She was no longer the poor assistant, no longer the girl who needed saving. She was the storm. Still at night, when the noise faded, she found herself wondering about him. Not the billionaire, not the broken man, but the boy underneath it all, the one who asked her to marry him not with flowers, but with fear. She didn't miss the power. She missed the honesty hidden behind his walls. Then at one of her major press events, he came. Not in a suit, not with fanfare. Just him, quiet, raw, real. The crowd gasped. He stepped up to the mic, and for the first time the line of Lagos stuttered. "I once tried to own you because I didn't believe I deserved to love you. You taught me otherwise, and whether you forgive me or not, I needed to say thank you." He stepped back. The room froze. The silence stretched until Amara walked up beside him, took the mic, and smiled. She turned to the crowd, her voice calm. "What would you do if the one who hurt you also helped you become who you are?" A collective gasp rippled through the audience. No answer, no kiss. Just that question, powerful, unfiltered, raw. She looked at Damian and whispered, "Redemption isn't about perfect endings. It's about changed choices." Then she turned back to the room, her hand brushing his, not quite holding, not quite letting go. And in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something real.